Now we're going to turn to the next session, and the person I'm going to introduce is actually the perfect definition of a polymath. Who do you know who's got a degree in astrophysical science, plus another degree in neuroscience, who's been at the Goddard Space Center, then is taught philosophy, and is now the head of the AI Center and a professor here? Michael Mannino.
That's right. I run this place. You're welcome. All right, Yuta, thank you so much for the introduction. And by the way, I find it, so now for something a little bit different. I'm happy to talk to you about my expertise at the intersection of neuroscience, as Yuta mentioned, and artificial intelligence. Let me see if I got this right here. Okay. And Yuta, I like that you have brains as your... This is a perfect thing. Okay, so that's pretty cool. All right. Okay, so let's get rolling here. Okay, so it's a perfect follow-up to a lot of the talks that we heard today, because a lot of things were mentioned, which I'll sort of bring up again. Charles, you mentioned some really interesting things that I like to not rehash, but just re-mention. And I want to sort of split this short talk into 3 themes. And the first thing we'll talk about is how AI influences neuroscience. And I want to talk to you about decoding the brain with artificial intelligence and machine learning, and sort of what that means for security, for our freedoms, for our mental liberties, and things like that. So we'll talk about AI decoding the brain signals. And then we'll sort of go the other direction. The other direction is how neuroscience is influencing AI. And these are not the only ways to think about these 2 topics and the intersection of these 2 topics, but I think it's interesting. So we'll talk about, I'll compare, if you will, human intelligence, or HI, versus artificial intelligence. And things like consciousness were mentioned earlier today. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what not only artificial intelligence means for our security in terms of our neural data, but artificial consciousness as something different, okay? And Charles, you mentioned, and several people mentioned earlier today, artificial general intelligence, the distinction between narrow AI and AGI, and then artificial superintelligence. So my point is, I don't think you can talk about those things without talking about neuroscience and how we understand the brain and cognitive neuroscience. So I think that's a very important and relevant connection there. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention a lot of the ethical considerations. So I'll just mention some of these topics: privacy, data security, equality and responsibility, and accountability. Okay, so with that, let's get started. Okay. Of course, you all know this company, and fascinatingly, just yesterday, Neuralink is announced they are actually recruiting subjects for the first human trials of its brain-computer interface, and they're looking at quadriplegic patients, actually. The reason why I bring this up, and I think it's important, is because one of the biggest points that I want to make here is that the most objective information we can have about ourselves and our own privacy is what's going on here at the level of your brain. That's the most objective metric or quantification, if you have that kind of data about yourself, your wishes, your desires, your concerns, your privacy. Your neural data is the end of the line, right? That's, I think, the most objective. So we talk about privacy in terms of that. This is and you're asking a neuroscientist here. I will tell you that I think a lot of what's going on with Neuralink is, let's just say, more neurohype than realism. But that's just my own personal opinion. By the way, you can ask questions during the talk, just like Charles did. That format is fine. So we talk about the threats of narrow AI and brain surveillance. Mark talked a little bit about the distinction between liberty and security. And I love this quote by one of my heroes, Benjamin Franklin. Those of you who give up essential liberty and purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So San Francisco is the first U.S. city to ban facial recognition. This came out in 2019. I want you to think about, and I just want to sort of raise the question here because there's not enough time to really answer it, and I don't even have a full answer for it. But what does this quote, Benjamin Franklin, which I think is one of the greatest scientists of all time, mean in terms of artificial intelligence? And as what's your name again? David mentioned in his first talk, this technology is fundamentally different in many ways. It's qualitatively, it's a paradigm shift in previous kinds of technologies. So let's talk about decoding the brain with AI. So now some fun stuff. So the more empirical stuff, then I'll get to the conceptual, abstract consciousness stuff in the second half of the talk, as I said. And what I mean here is understanding the specific and nuanced patterns of neural activity with machine learning. What can we get at with the brain, with neural data, with artificial intelligence? And it turns out some really scary, but also really cool stuff, okay? The way we measure these different brain signals, I'll just cover this really briefly. We stick people in scanners called fMRI scanners, read their blood flow, which is indicative of neurons firing in their brain. This is really good spatial resolution, so we know where things in the brain happen, but not so much when they happen. One of the other main methods is EEG, electroencephalography. So this is putting EEG caps on people and literally measuring their brain waves, alpha, beta, gamma, theta brain waves. Really good time resolution, but we don't know exactly where things are happening. So what can we get with this kinds of neural data with artificial intelligence? One of the coolest things, I think, to come online, literally, is this idea of brain reconstruction, okay? So what scientists have done is we'll have people look at a set of faces, these 5 faces, which I think were actually generated by AI. And then we'll put them in scanners, have them look at this, and there's visual information back in your visual cortex here, these neurons firing. Machine learning can actually decode those firing patterns and then reconstruct what the people are looking at without knowing what the people are actually looking at. And you can see there is some, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. This person's smiling, this person's not smiling. So this is just AI reading the brain signals. The next thing I'm going to show you is really cool. So on the left side, you'll see a movie, a person watching a movie clip. And on the right side, you'll see what the reconstruction of that is just from reading the brain signal. Okay, so here's the movie clip, and here's the clip reconstructed from brain activity. Can you get rid of that? Okay. How did I do that? Oh, thank you. So, thank you. You can see it's pretty crude, but it's getting it pretty right, okay? So they're just watching the brain, the people are just watching that, and you can see that just from reading the neural activity in the back of the brain, we can actually reconstruct the movie that the person is watching. Scientists have already, and you may have heard this, but scientists have already have a proof of concept where you literally put people in the fMRI scanners, they go to sleep and dream, and we can play the dreams on a video. So we think about like what security means in terms of your own thinking and your own thoughts. Who would want their dreams to? I think it would be pretty cool. And you'll eventually, it's actually a study just came out 2 weeks ago with using stable diffusion that you don't even have to put people in these huge brain scanners or put like 64, 128 channel EEG caps on. We can do this with consumer devices that are out there on the market, like the Muse, for example. So imagine you get a Muse or you get a Focuscom for a couple $100. You have an app that can actually replay crudely on your phone what you dreamt last night on a video in a format. So that's coming very soon. Here's another example using generative AI. So these images on the top are the images that people were watching. Then using text to image, but like neural data to text and then text to image. And these Gen AI reproduced the visual images from what the people were actually looking at. So you can see there, it's crude, but it's pretty accurate. This study made CNN, Anderson Cooper I think, or I forget who it was actually reported on this. So it was all the way in CNN. Scientists were using GPT-1, a precursor of GPT-4, to passively read people's thoughts in a breakthrough. What they did here was they put people in scanners for 16 hours, they read their brain waves, and then they were looking at stories, like narratives. And then they also imagined their own story. They were told to imagine their own story. And the AI was able to get, in certain cases, the exact phrasing, but mostly it got the gist of what of the story that the person was actually looking at or reading. So the meaning, the sort of the semantic, the concepts, the gist of the story. So you can see here, the actual stimulus was, I don't have my driver's license yet, and I just jumped right when I needed to. And she says, well, why don't you come back to my house and I'll give you a ride? I say, okay. She is not ready. She has not even started to learn to drive yet. I had to push her out of the car. I said, we will take her home now. And she agreed. So you have exact phrasing, the gist, and then the errors as well. So in other words, it wasn't only reading the brain signals, it was then using generative AI to constrain the output so that you can actually get the gist of the story that the person was either reading or just imagining. So really, really cool stuff. Now, in this particular case, you had to scan people's brains for 16 hours. And if I don't scan your brain, because there's a personalized component to all this, then I can't, and the system will break, right? So you have to train the model in the particular brain, which takes a lot of energy. This is a brain-computer interface, which I'm sure many of you have seen. Here we have a woman actually just thinking to move her arm and take a drink. And so that's using machine learning. AI-driven algorithms can detect what are called brain fingerprints. So each of us have a unique thumbprint. We also have a brain fingerprint, and machine learning can actually detect that. And it's so accurate that you can actually predict with 99% accuracy a person's IQ based on knowing their brain fingerprint. You can actually detect autism and things like that as well. AI can decode brain signals to allow paralyzed people to handwrite. So if I go A, B, C, and I don't move my arm, I just think about moving my arm in that way, the AI can actually decode that and write out A, B, C, D. Deep learning can actually be used to recognize depression in speech, because we have certain phrases that we use, tonality, prosody. There's all these things that the human brain cannot recognize that deep learning can, that are indicative of when a person is actually clinically depressed. Convolutional neural network was using, can diagnose mild cognitive impairment. I'll just read off some of these for you here. Artificial intelligence can predict brain age, your actual brain age, just from your EEG signals. Can help people with autism to read emotions, predict dementia now. This was really fascinating. This came out just a couple months ago. AI can now detect early stage Parkinson's disease just from your breathing patterns. So you go to sleep, you put on a strap, you breathe throughout the night, and AI can detect that. Paul Zak came out with this study a few weeks ago. Machine learning can now predict whether a song will be a hit with 97% accuracy just by reading the neural activity of when you're listening to that song. So this is something called neuroforecasting. We can actually predict with 97% accuracy whether a song will be a smash hit just from reading the neural activity in your brain from when you're actually listening to that song. So in other words, whether a song will be a hit is in our brains, right? Ultimately, it comes back to in our brains. Our behaviors are other things too, but also our brains. So if we can actually detect and decode those kinds of signals, we can predict when a song will be a hit. Pretty crazy. Machine learning reveals brain networks involved in child aggression as well. So with that, it brings up all of these questions about responsible AI and these ethical considerations. I won't cover all of these here, but there's a lot, right? Privacy. I think our notions of privacy will have to change based on AI decoding brain signals, and especially using generative AI as well. Over-reliance on AI for diagnosis. In fact, a company just came online called iBerry. They secured, I think, $8 million in seed funding. Just using natural language processing and computer vision can now detect suicidal ideation just in a 5 or 10 minute conversation. Anxiety, depression, things like that. This company, Wisa, is using generative AI in cognitive behavioral therapeutic context. So it's using CBT as a personal therapist, and it's working. It's pretty incredible. Having said all that, what are the risks posed by this idea of AI decoding brain data and getting at our most personal information, which is the point that I'm trying to make here? What are the potential misuses of brain-computer interfaces? I'm doing some research on this as well, but Nita Farahani out of Duke University just published a book, which I would highly recommend, called The Battle for Your Brain: Defending the Right to Think Freely in the Age of Neurotechnology. And again, now that these consumer devices are coming out, you can buy them for a couple $100. It's going to become more ubiquitous that all of our neural signals are going to get out there in the world. Okay, it's not just you have to put people in scanners and put huge, expensive $18,000 caps on their head. It's going to be very scalable and consumer friendly. So, moving into the second half now of my talk, my question is: can we still be what I consider myself a techno optimist? Okay, can we still be a techno optimist? And I think we can, given all that concern and uncertainty that I just talked about. I think AI will save the world. I think a lot of these amazing things that AI can do with our neural data are very interesting, but you have all of these proclamations, right? Artificial intelligence can lead to extinction. You've seen this. Jeffrey Hinton leaves. We pause giant AI experiments, right? Because as David was saying, the pace at which this technology is increasing itself, and that seriously outpaces the slowness of government regulation. And all my science fiction fans out there, Charles, I'm looking at you. Dune, universe, banned AI. Should we? Even the CSO, the chief science officer, I believe, of OpenAI said it may be that today's large neural networks are slightly conscious. Wow. That was mind-blowing when I saw that. And to all of my neuroscientist colleagues across the world, I am in stark disagreement with that as a neuroscientist, but we can get into that if you have any questions. So it brings up this question: is artificial consciousness possible? We have artificial intelligence, and when these things become more and more intelligent, there's this idea, this mistake, I think, that a lot of people like Isla make, that they equate or conflate intelligence with consciousness. The idea is that as these machines become more and more intelligent, at one point, the lights come on. They become sentient. They become self-aware. That's what consciousness is, right? It's the colors that we see. It's the emotions and internal sensations that we get. It's an awareness. It's a qualitative sense. We all know it, right? It goes offline. How many people have been under anesthesia? General anesthesia for surgery? That's what goes away. When you wake up, consciousness comes back, right? When we're in deep sleep, consciousness goes away. So we all know this idea of self-awareness. Can machines be conscious, right? That's sort of what we're talking about here. My close friend and colleague, Anil Seth, who's the director of the Sackler Center for Consciousness in the UK, wrote recently a great article, which I highly recommend you read, called "Why Conscious AI is a Bad Idea." He and I and many neuroscientists do not think that conscious AI is possible in principle, let alone in practice. Or I should say in practice, let alone in principle, for several reasons. One is this idea that people, as I said, conflate intelligence with consciousness. And there's no reason to believe from a neuroscientific perspective that as things become more and more intelligent, they'll suddenly become conscious. Having said that, he, myself, and other neuroscientists have signed a letter that we do agree that we should really take very big concerns and precautions, the precautionary principle, right? That we should not try to actually develop conscious AI as it stands right now. That we should definitely put a pause. And there are people already trying to do this, and not only making statements like the chief science officer of OpenAI, but trying to develop conscious artificial consciousness. So what does that look like? What would it even look like? How would we know? And this is where I'm going to, Charles, bring up my AlphaGo example as well. Here I want to talk to you, just to give you a little bit of an indication here. What is the difference between human intelligence and artificial intelligence? Because I don't think a lot of people actually know that, right? At least explicitly, even the chief science officer of OpenAI. But this is, of course, DeepMind beat Gary Kasparov, the world's greatest chess player at that time, based on these patterns and predictions. Of course, next came the semantic part of this, right? IBM Watson won Jeopardy. So understanding the nuances of language and equivocation and semantics. And then, of course, the AlphaGo example. Now, what Charles didn't mention, was, it's very well known, maybe some of you know this, but game 2, move 37. Should look it up. Move 37 of game 2, AlphaGo made a move that completely stunned Lee Sedol and the rest of the world. And it was sort of indicative, probably, of of what? Exactly. And creativity. And so that is really interesting, right? So that was a little scary, but also, quite compelling and interesting. So what's the difference? How would we know between whether artificial intelligence is conscious, whether it can be creative, whether it can be compassionate or empathetic? By the way, there's if you don't know of a Hey Pi, how many people know of Hey Pi, the LLM Hey Pi? Yeah, so you could try that too. It's a more empathic, kinder, gentler, compassionate ChatGPT, essentially. Exactly, personal intelligence. A study just came out a few months ago that infants outperform AI in common sense, or what's called folk psychology. So infants can actually, we humans have what's called a theory of mind. I understand that you're all listening to me now. I see your head nodding, things like that. I know you understand what I'm saying. You're interested, I could tell, or at least most of you. Some of you are, right. That's called a theory of mind. I understand that you have desires, wishes, things like that. Babies outperform these artificial neural networks in understanding the motivation behind people better than the ANNs. So that's really, that's just fascinating to me. Human intelligence versus AI, complex decision making. Mark talked about a little bit about VUCA, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity when he was talking about flexibility. So we can make decisions in VUCA. We generalize, we transfer our learning, we move from one domain to the other. We have emotions and empathy, which significantly contributes to our decision making. Creativity and innovation. Of course, human intelligence has limitations as well. We are subject to cognitive biases, speed of processing information, emotional interference. Narrow AI, very good at identifying patterns far beyond human capabilities, right? Like recognizing Parkinson's disease. Speed and efficiency, it's much better. Consistency, consistent performance given the same input, right? You'll get the same output, but remember, it's still garbage in, garbage out. As I see a lot of head nodding out there. AI is still garbage in, garbage out. Limitations, lacks context, common sense reasoning, empathy. And of course, it depends, as I just said, or indicated, on the quality and the quantity of data it was trained on, and it still can perpetuate biases present in the data. So now a little bit about the brain, and then we'll get into how I want to finish my talk. This is a picture of the human brain, the most complex system of which we know. This is actually my brain. You can see all the holes if you look closely. No, I'm just kidding. 86 billion neurons, many more glial cells, 125 trillion connections. I just wanted to get you to understand the difference between what, these chips out there, these models out there, and the complexity. We don't even need complexity science yet to actually understand how artificial intelligence works, I don't think, but we do need it. We need complex adaptive systems to understand the brain. The brain was traditionally parcellated into like the visual cortex, temporal lobes, the frontal lobe and the parietal lobe, these sort of four traditional lobes of the brain. We now know that the brain can be parcellated into like hundreds of different cytoarchitectonic structures that can all talk to one another in very dynamic ways. I'm going to show you a really cool visualization of how that works. Even just the outer 2 millimeters of the human brain, this right here, just the gray matter. So there's the white matter, right? And then, the corpus callosum connecting the 2 hemispheres. There's the cerebellum, which you could see is kind of weaker from all the whiskey that I like. I'm just kidding. But even this gray matter, this 2 millimeters, is separated into 6 different cortical layers, and that's like a little bit of a picture of what it actually looks like. It's an amazingly complex system. So we think about what ANNs look like from 1980s and moving up with deep learning models from 2000s. It's a black box, but this is also, I'm trying to say, a black box. So understanding what's going on in the hidden layers and how these sort of things work is enormously, I think, It's not simple, but it's simpler than understanding the complexity of the human brain. These two guys won the Nobel Prize back in 1950s. This is Hubel and Wiesel. They actually designed the first computational model of a neuron. This is what I used in my research, actually. And it's just a set of differential equations. All the way up to now, this massively failed project. This project failed massively. This is the Human Brain Project in the EU, using massive supercomputers to try and simulate consciousness, or to simulate cognition or cognitive processes like learning, like working memory, like perception, like language use. Nevertheless, AI is helping scientists to explain our brain. But let me just give you a brief argument of why that won't work. Okay, and this right here is I'm drawing the line between the difference between artificial intelligence and why I think AGI is not possible in practice and in principle, versus what we know from cognitive neuroscience. So first of all, the human brain is robust, right? I can sever your two hemispheres and you could still live quite well, actually. Whereas if I stick a pencil in a CPU or a GPU, right, not going to work, right? So it's enormously robust, the human brain. It's enormously efficient, right? We know this, 24 million watts versus just the 20 watts that the human brain runs on. Think about a supercomputer. The connectivity is incredible. So we think about the connectivity of artificial intelligence, even like model connectivity versus hardware connectivity, but also the connectivity of the brain is enormously complex. And neuroplasticity. Our brains are plastic, right? They change in response to external stimuli and internal stimuli as well. This is a beautiful, beautiful thing that evolution has bequeathed us with. Okay, so let me finish up. Having said that, we do have a storage capacity. The brain storage capacity is about 2.5 petabytes. It's estimated, okay? So I'll leave you with this beautiful, beautiful visualization, computational visualization of a human brain playing a game in virtual reality in real time. This is Adam Ghazali, my colleague at USCF. This is called the glass brain. This is his brain. And you could just see all the colors lighting up. These are the different brain waves like alpha, beta, gamma, and delta. And the neurons are firing in response to stimuli from the virtual reality. And you kind of do a fly through his brain. And you could just see the beauty and the complexity of what's going on in the brain that produces things like cognition and ultimately consciousness. So having said all that, this conference in cybersecurity, going back to Nita Farahani and the battle for your brain and this most objective personal data that we have, she says, we must establish the right to cognitive liberty. I love that phrase, cognitive liberty, to protect our freedom of thought and rumination, our mental privacy, and self-determination over our brains and mental experiences. I think it's a really huge concern, and people are looking into this, and it's a scary thing, but also a very, again, I think an optimistic thing as well. So I'll leave that. Thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Mike.
Concerns?
I think there's a question here.
Avi.
Being a disabled veteran of the Israeli army, I was always concerned about it, and I was wondering if you saw the 60 Minutes about implanting electrodes, connecting a disabled person's brain to his artificial hand and controlling it by thought. I feel that this is where we are going for integration of AI and human brain.
Yeah.
And what do you think about this potential?
Yeah, I think there's enormous potential in that, and this idea of human-centric AI. I think actually, I agree with you. I think you hit the nail on the head, Avi. I think, if you can hear me, I think that oh, it is working? Okay, good. That the whole idea of conscious AI is probably going to be a moot point because of the integration Non-invasive, let's just say, because there's Neuralink, but non-invasive integration of artificial intelligence, reading all of our data, making recommendations for us, personalizing, optimizing, detecting, all of those things. So
this
yeah,
60 minutes showed an invasive. They actually
right.
cut an electrode and
video I showed.
connected it to the brain, and he was thinking about the movement.
Yeah.
And his fingers were the artificial hand was moving the
yeah.
fingers.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I eventually will be able to do that with artificial intelligence non-invasively. We're already doing that. So yeah, correct. Thanks, Avi. Yeah. David. Oh yeah. Go ahead. You want to one more question? I know. I'm sure. I want the hard ones. Give me the hard ones.
So, for instance, you believe that AGI is not practical or in principle possible.
Right. I think yes. Yes.
So let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
I'm going to agree with you that elements consciousness.
Okay.
The question I want to ask you is:
Does it follow from that?
Is consciousness required for artificial general intelligence in your mind?
I don't think it's a necessary. I think it's a necessary but not sufficient condition to be a little bit more nuanced in my argument for artificial general intelligence. My point is that I think conscious AI is something altogether different, because then it has values. It has, we might be obligated to take care of it, right? To concern for it. It wasn't that, as Anil Seth, Frankenstein's creature came to life. It's that it could feel.
Yeah. So let me ask you this: do you think brain violates the laws of physics?
No, absolutely not. But I don't think the laws of physics are up to the task of explaining the brain. I think you need to go beyond. I think it's not only physics. I think you need complexity science and other fields to come into play to explain the human brain. Possibly. Look, I don't think this is the only possible thing that could instantiate consciousness. So I think your argument is what's called a functionalist, right? However, I do think that this is an embodied thing. It's living flesh, tissue. There's this notion of embodied cognition or embodied consciousness. And I think that, you have things like robotics and embodied artificial intelligence, right? But I think that also is a necessary condition for consciousness. Let's just say an embodiment, right? A coupling to its environment to actually move around and feel things and shape the world to the way we move. Okay. So that was the final argument in the argument I was giving about neuroplasticity.
We'll take one more question there, and then we'll move to the next session, and then we can all stay later.
We can geek out.
Geek out as much as we'd like. Please go ahead.
It can be talked about
if AI emulating or becoming AGI is possible through quantitative plotting of human feelings and psychology as conditions, then what is the difference between it? What's the difference? Because if it can learn, if it understands what love is, if it can understand what creativity is, if it can learn all of these things, then what is the defining factor that separates it from consciousness?
That's a great question. It might not even be necessary for AI to be conscious for us to, there's do you know the Turing test? So there's a reframe of the Turing test called the Garland test from the movie Ex Machina, where AI gives this cognitive illusion. So in other words, just like visual illusions, like you can look at the visual illusion and your brain still gets fooled, even though you know that it's an illusion and how it works. You cannot get beyond that, right? Your visual cortex cannot get beyond the illusion, even though cognitively you know how it works. Same thing might happen with artificial intelligence, right? We can, like, it might not need to like actually experience consciousness or love or empathy or those kinds of things, but it might just be an illusion. But it presents to us this cognitive illusion, and that has could have also interesting consequences for religions, for the way we interact with it, for our mental health, all of those kinds of things. So that also is a real concern, like Hey Pi, for example, right? Or these companies that are coming online that are using cognitive behavioral therapy to actually not get you to commit suicide because you think that it understands you. So there are real positive benefits out there, but that presents major concerns. So I don't have I'd say hand wavy answer to, I don't know the difference, but there might not need even to be a difference. I was saying that there is, but there might not need to be. Okay. Yep. Yeah. 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 What is the development or the future of AI in neurodevelopmental disorders? Yeah. I even presented one of those studies. I went over it briefly that emotion reading AI assistants can now assist people with autism who are non-neurotypical. So I think the future of I don't want to say like making atypical people neurotypical. I don't want to go there. But I think that there's enormous potential. I can give you tons of examples of artificial intelligence alleviating, helping people with autism or who are in the spectrum or with schizophrenia. It's good things. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. And I just love the parallels and the mutual reinforcement between the two. And